There is a test, a journey, that all of us will take early in our lives, but not all of us will emerge stronger at the other end. This is how to work out if you've been captured by the dark forces of your early shadow self, and if so, how to restart your story and ultimately awaken the warrior within. My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the fantasy mental health game Betwixt, which is where you can find all of my best and most creative tools for self-awareness building. And this series of videos is devoted to the, in my opinion, fascinating world of archetypal character arcs. The tale of the Tenderfoot, which is my gender-neutral name for the more traditional maiden's journey, is the archetypal journey taken by any human being when they begin their psychological process of individuation. That is, discovering and asserting themselves as individuals. Culturally, you'll know this character arc as the classic coming-of-age story. Any book, film or other story about a character who leaves a small or unreal protected world, like their childhood home or the Matrix in The Matrix, to venture out into the big, bad, scary real world is telling us a Tenderfoot's tale. Or maybe I should say retelling, because we all know this story already. We have likely lived it ourselves, and even if we haven't, as an archetypal story, one that's been told by generation after generation since the mythic beginning of time, the Tenderfoot's challenges and triumphs are basically etched into our DNA, which makes this story potentially hugely transformative whenever we encounter it. But, and this is an important but, even though we know this story unconsciously, unless we bring it into our conscious awareness, it could end up doing us more harm than good. Think of it this way. When you know the story, when it is conscious for you, then you will always have the ability to choose the healthy, empowering path of the Tenderfoot proper. But when you don't know this story, if it is unconscious for you, then you will be at risk of unknowingly succumbing to the temptation of the Tenderfoot's much darker shadow archetypes. So this short video is all about how to avoid that trap by bringing these shadow archetypes out of the unconscious darkness and into the light. Let me start by quickly setting the scene. The Tenderfoot story is an initiation. Psychologically, we take this journey anytime we find a certain situation feeling too small for us, our childhood family set up, for example, or a job or relationship, and find ourselves needing, perhaps even itching, to break free and explore the bigger, scarier, riskier real world as an autonomous individual. This journey will involve a reckoning with perhaps external but certainly internal archetypes of authority, that is, the rules we're expected to follow along with the enforcers of said rules, and the predator, a toxic individual if external, or the destructive, sabotaging force inside of us that wants to keep us small. As with all the archetypal character arcs we'll be exploring in this series, the Tenderfoot's journey can be understood as a transition from a particular lie to a better truth. In other words, when our Tenderfoot has swapped their belief in the need to submit to authority for a more empowered belief of personal sovereignty, that is, autonomous control over our own authentic lives, then they have completed their transition. The Tenderfoot is a Tenderfoot no more. They have awoken the warrior within and leveled up. But what happens if they don't? Well, failure to overcome the threat posed by authority and/or the predator would mean that our Tenderfoot must have fallen prey to one of their shadow archetypes. The naif, which is the Tenderfoot's submissive shadow representing a passive refusal to accept the call to individuation, or the tempest, the Tenderfoot's aggressive shadow representing a combative, rebellious refusal to make the transition to adulthood. These archetypes exist at the two ends of a continuum from a passive existence to an aggressive one, with the Tenderfoot in the balanced, assertive point in the middle. The ideal, in other words. And, as mentioned, in order to avoid the trap of slipping to either one of these destructive poles yourself, you will need to arm yourself with awareness. So let's start by meeting the naif. You can think of the naif as the rule-following, innocent and naive good boy/girl/child. My favourite naif example is Willow from the earlier seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Prim and fluffy, Willow's just a little bit feeble at the beginning. Or, if you don't know that reference, think also Rapunzel in Tangled or Ophelia in Hamlet. The naif is the version of the Tenderfoot who has never taken responsibility for themselves, probably because they've been actively discouraged from doing so. So instead, they obey without question, never straying from the path laid out for them by authority. Somewhat ironically, when we inhabit this role in real life, we're often congratulated and praised for our apparent sensible maturity. But it's not real maturity, because the naif isn't coming to these conclusions on their own, they're just doing what they're told. And the older they get, the more damaging this dependent immaturity will get for the naive, because they never learn to look after themselves. They don't get to awaken the warrior. At the other end of the continuum, we have the combative polarity of Tempest. Think Lydia from Pride and Prejudice, Edmund from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Or, to stick with the Buffy theme, where the naif is Willow, the Tempest has to be Faith, the bad girl / boy / child / slayer. Of course, in reality, this is a facade. Defiant in the face of authority, the Tempest wants to show power, but is either unwilling or just not ready to claim the true, authentic and crucially responsible power that's up for grabs on this path. So instead, the Tempest succumbs to the destructive force of the predator within and tries to empower themselves with anger, which usually hurts them more than anyone else and certainly doesn't win success on this journey. Let's see if we can lock down these two shadow archetypes with an example. Imagine that our Tenderfoot is born into a family of doctors and lawyers, and even though some little ember of awareness inside them knows that they want to be an artist or musician or anything else, they are too out of touch with that desire and too enthralled by authority to even acknowledge it. So unconsciously, they bury it deep, and they go to medical school or they pass the bar, and later they may start the family that's expected and live in the house and the neighbourhood that's expected. They live a life that never quite feels as if it's their own, because it isn't. Now, in the same starting situation, our Tenderfoot may not have submitted to authority, but stormed down the Tempest's end of the continuum instead, where they shout and argue and refuse to go to medical school or law school, but they don't really listen to that ember of awareness either, because although they look like opposites, what the naive and Tempest have in common is that they both still believe that they must submit to authority. So while the Tempest doesn't go and get the doctorate or the law degree, they don't feed their authentic desire either. They don't become their authentic self. So why don't we all take the positive empowering path from the outset? Because of fear, because of shame, because we're human. We can become possessed by either of these shadow archetypes because we are afraid to mature, afraid to be ourselves, afraid of the vulnerability that we'll face in the real world, afraid that we just won't cut it. Now, if this sounds like you, do not worry, because both the naive and the Tempest are more than capable of making the transition back to the Tenderfoot arc and therefore levelling up to warrior. To do this, we need to open our eyes to the forces that control us and dig up that ember of self that we buried. We do this by asking the simple question of what do I want? Then we can choose to embrace the responsibility of meeting our own needs and of wielding and owning our true potential and strengths, as opposed to wielding the false power of anger, as does the Tempest. Crucially, this can happen at any stage in life. It's never too late. As always, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you taken the tale of the Tenderfoot in your lifetime? Are there contexts in your life, home, work, studies, love, money, where you think that you might still be following the rules without question or rebelling tempestuously without actually moving forward? Tell me about it if you want to. Don't if you don't. Either way, I really hope this helps. And if you would like to take an epic journey through a magical world in the name of personal growth and wellness, then you can download Betwixt, the mental health game, which is available on the iOS App Store and Google Play.